Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Somerville Historic Preservation Commission. I'm now going to call to order. And I'm going to start by having everybody on the commission who's here tonight introduce yourselves. I'm Dick Bauer. I'm a member of the commission. The chair, Alan Bingham, is not able to be here tonight, and so I will be chairing the meeting. I'm an attorney and I was trained as a city planner, and I live in the Spring Hill neighborhood.
How should we do this?
Robin,
Maybe
you want to go next?
What's that?
I was suggesting Robin go next.
Oh,
I see that people don't all show in the same order.
Right.
Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin Kelly, and I am the Realtor member of the commission, and I'm also a historic homeowner in Union Square.
Thanks. And then DJ?
Sure. I'm DJ Shagnon. I'm a landscape architect, alternate member on the commission, homeowner right around the corner from the Armory. So, edges of Spring Hill.
Thanks. Adam?
I am Adam Wiley, a resident of Ward 2, and I am a construction manager and contractor.
Thanks. Eric?
I am Eric Parks, resident of Ward 3, architect.
Thanks. Ryan? No, we can't hear you, Ryan.
Can't hear you. No. I guess we'll have to go back to the lousy audio.
I'm Ryan Fowley, a resident of Ward 2.
Thanks, Ryan. Are there any other commissioners who are here tonight who are not showing up in the video?
I think that's it.
Okay, great. So want to go to the agenda for tonight.
And Mr. Chairman,
Mhm.
on the agenda tonight, as you pull it up, would you mind reading into the record the area highlighted in yellow pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, et cetera?
Sure. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15, 2020, this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission will be conducted via remote participation. We will have an audio recording available on request as soon as possible after the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to remind everybody, a roll call vote will be taken for all determinations that you make tonight. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, could I make a note about 125 Highland?
Sure.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please, go ahead.
So my name is Sarah White, and I'm a senior zoning and preservation planner with the City of Somerville. And I am the liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission. And so anyone who is here for 125 Highland Ave tonight, it will be discussed tonight, but it will be discussed under other business. And this is because even though it was advertised for a determination of historic significance for this evening, that was an error. In fact, it is automatically determined to be historically significant according to the demolition review ordinance that we now have. And that is because it's on the National Register of Historic Places. So one of the provisions of our new ordinance states that if in fact a building is listed on the National Register, it automatically is historically significant. So the Historic Preservation Commission has no determination to make tonight on 124 Highland Avenue. Next month, it will move to a determination of whether or not it should be preferably preserved, and that will be a public hearing. However, there will be an informal discussion in public meeting between the applicant for the property and the Historic Preservation Commission, and that will occur as the first item under other business once the Historic Preservation Commission has completed, has gone through their other cases for the evening. So there won't be a public comment on 125 Highland tonight. However, you will be able to certainly stay on and listen to discussion. But all of the other cases that are advertised for tonight do have a public hearing component, whether for the determination of historic significance or for the determination of being preferably preserved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me just add that people will be able to make comments about 125 Highland at the public hearing next month. So we hope if you are interested in that, you will come back for that public hearing. The first item on the agenda tonight are group of properties with determinations for preferably preserved status, which is the second step of the demolition review process. As Sarah just explained, the first step is a determination of historic significance. These 4 properties have already been determined to be historic, and tonight we'll have public hearings about whether they are preferably preserved. The first case is HPC DMO 2020.27. That's 129 Boston Avenue. The applicant's here.
And Mr. Chairman, I am just looking through, it should be Eamon Fee would be the applicant. Trying to see if he's here. And if you're here for 129 Boston Avenue as the applicant, would you please raise your hand in the raise hand function? And I do not see at this time that the applicant is here, Mr. Chairman. We could pause and take another case first and see if they show up, or you could discuss it now, either way, because we don't have a continuance from them. It would need to be discussed tonight, and public testimony as well taken.
So let's hold this and see if they show up. In the meantime, we can take cases for the people who are here.
All right, very good. And I'll keep my eye on the list.
The next case tonight is HPC DMO 2021.02, and that's 21 to 23 Ellen Street. Are those
And
applicants
for
here?
that, yes, Charlotte, could you unmute Julian Lewis? And let me see, who else do we have here?
Caleb Manchester would also.
Okay, Maxwell Shortsleeve. I'm sorry, what was that? Was that Caleb, did you say,
Yep.
Julian? Okay.
Yeah, Caleb Manchester, exactly.
Okay, Caleb Manchester, and is Phil here as well?
I don't think Phil is on.
I don't think so. Okay, very good. All right, is everybody all set, Charlotte?
Yes, all 3 members of the applicant team are unmuted.
Thank you. And for anybody speaking this evening who is not a member of the commission, because we can't see you, would you please state your name every time you make a statement? And if you're not actually speaking, would you please mute yourself?
Thank you. So first, we want to give the applicants an opportunity to tell us a bit about your project.
Hi, sure. Yep. So our project located at 21 Allen.
Name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right off the bat, I made a mistake. This is Caleb Manchester.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm sorry. So this is 21 to 23 that we're discussing?
That's correct.
Okay. So the existing property has a couple of structures on it. And I think last time we determined that these were in some fashion historically relevant, and we are looking to fully demolish those.
And what are you planning to put up in their place?
Our plans are not well developed yet. We are working on it.
Anything else from you or from other applicants?
For anybody who might be driving, would you please mute yourself?
Thank
All
you.
right. Sure. Any other comments, Caleb, that you know of from any of the other members of your team?
Not that I know of, unless Julian has something.
Okay.
Thanks. So now, I want to, at this point, Sarah, are we going to write public comment, or do you want to present the staff report first?
It's entirely up to you. You could do it either way.
So let's take public comment then. So are there members of the public who would like to comment on this proposal?
If you want to comment on the proposal, would you please use the raise your hand function next to your name? You'll see a hand and you just need to click that so that you can ask a question or make a comment. Charlotte, do you see anybody?
Bill Cavallini, you are unmuted. You may need to unmute yourself as well.
Yes, thank you. My name is Bill Cavallini. I live at 33 Oak Street in Union Square, Somerville. I spoke at the last hearing, and I want to speak again to remind the commissioners that I referred to a historically significant building across on the other side of Prospect Street in a district that has some historically significant buildings, even though I haven't been designated so by the commission. And that's the 14 Everett Street Samuel Tuttle House, which was designated significant and preferably preserved back, I believe, in 2010. And I want to just point out that that was determined significant because of it was an Italianate style, and it also was built in 1856. And some of these buildings here on Allen Street have some aspects to them that are reminiscent of what you find in that small little district on Emerson and Everett Streets. And I just wanted to remind you all of that, and of my testimony the last time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who'd like to comment on this?
This is Charlotte speaking. At this time, I do not see any other members raising their hand indicating that they would wish to speak.
Thank you. So let me ask Sarah for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, yes. So further research into the property has shown some really has unearthed additional information regarding the inhabitants. We see a significant trend in Irish immigration, there were a lot of Irish immigrants in this part of the city. And so the fact that some of these Irish immigrants became property owners, and then this property in particular ended up containing at some point 3 structures on it is rather significant for an immigrant at this time. A lot of the people who lived in the house were laborers, and if reading the staff report, you'll see that certainly being a laborer was a very it was a hard job. There was low pay, it was often dangerous, and the hours were long. So the fact that they were able to save enough money in order to buy property was quite something. One of the residents owned a variety store in the area, which would have served Union Square, which would have served this area in particular, this street, and the businesses in the immediate area. So she would have been privy to the stories of people's lives, right? So she had probably more intimate details about what people did and who they were, and details about them than other people. Their deaths are noted. Their death certificates were found highly unpleasant. They were, diseases which anybody could have fallen prey to. But I think it also speaks to the period of time when we didn't know how to treat a lot of diseases. Our, medical system was crude. Our approach to medicine was crude, certainly compared to today, but had come a long way. So when they actually died, the deaths were unpleasant and the diseases were equally unpleasant. Don't really know of many diseases that are otherwise pleasant. But then also, even in death, they remained in the area. So with the Flaherty Funeral Home, which became Brown and Flaherty, up until 2016, it was in service, and they, served as the funeral home for the wife of O'Callaghan, of Charles O'Callaghan, who owned the property at one point. And it was St. Joseph's right across the street that held her funeral. So what these show is these aren't just like bits and pieces of lives. If you really look at it, what it does is it shows a trend, right? And it shows that this is a neighborhood existence. Everything happened in the neighborhood. The ties were to the neighborhood, and every portion of a person's existence really spoke to that. And the neighborhood itself holds a great deal of meaning to these people, and as does the street and the structures as well.
Thank you. Any comments on the physical structure that you want to add to that?
Nothing more on the physical structures that I wanted to make note of. I really made most of those points in the report on historic significance, also available online as well. But it appears that these buildings have always been in the location where they currently are, particularly the gable-fronted ones that are at the front of the street, around the street side. And there is a Form B that was uncovered about one of the buildings that suggests it might have been built as early as 1840, right? Cheaply built, workers' housing, quickly built. But yet the fact that it's still around kind of is a testament to the manner in which it was built. And again, we still haven't been able to discern if the building at the rear was built on site or was moved on site. It's definitely fancier and much bigger than the other two buildings at the front. So an interesting amalgamation of structures on this one lot that came to be owned by a group of immigrant laborers to Somerville.
Thank you. We open it now for discussion by commissioners.
I guess I'll just jump in and say that I have the same feelings as I did last time, which is that this is a fairly rare example of the type of housing which is mostly gone in the Union Square area. It represents a certain type of occupant which is early in the history of the Union Square, as Sarah was talking about, often overlooked because their structures were not that fancy. It's relevant, it's very important. This particular little stretch of street happens to have a nice concentration of them, as the other area across the square that Bill mentioned earlier, which is quickly disappearing. So I think that the structure ought to remain if possible. It'd be kind of a shame to lose either one of them that's on this parcel.
Eric, by either one of them, are you referring to the two front structures or including the rear structure in there?
The rear structure. The rear structure is actually really well intact. It's not in the greatest shape, but it's this is the lot that has two structures on it, right? This particular one.
It has three. So the two gabled in front, and then the clear Italianate bracketed in the rear.
Right, all three of them. I mean, the two the front on the street, because obviously the streetscape they frame the streetscape in a more cohesive way. But the one at the back there is sort of like a little diamond in the rough. It's very intact, because it's older siding, original windows, massing, all that kind of stuff that we look for. So I think all three, in my eyes, are better preserved.
Thanks, Eric. Other commissioners?
Hi, it's Robin. I will echo everything that Eric just said, that I think that the collection of smaller scale wood framed houses along Allen Street speaks to its history, and that as a grouping, they're important, these two in particular together. And then the 3-story building in the back just has so much good original detail remaining and original stuff. And it's an attractive example of that form. So I think that these are worth preserving.
Thanks. Other commissioners? DJ, Adam, or Ryan?
And I wasn't here for the previous discussion, so I missed a lot of the discussion of the architecture and the significance that took place then. But I agree. I mean, it's especially, the two front structures are part of the character of the streetscape, definitely, and fit into the overall history of the neighborhood. And then the rear structure is, a rare example, sort of that style of architecture that we don't find often. And just the modesty of those front structures sort of speaks to the cultural stuff that Sarah included in the staff report.
Thanks, DJ.
Yeah.
Adam or Ryan?
Yeah, I'll just agree with everything that has been said and just point out, I know Robin had said there's a lot of original items. I mean, it looks like even the windows on the second and third story of the rear building look to be original. And then I've always been really impressed that the cornice and brackets are still there. So I'll just add that those specific details, the fact that it has the original windows on 2 floors is pretty amazing. That's it.
Thanks. Any more comments? Ryan, I can't tell whether you're trying to and are having audio problems.
You're muted, Ryan. We can't hear you.
This is Charlotte speaking. I think Ryan is transitioning onto his phone. So he'll just need to enter his PIN, and then that should enable him to unmute himself.
Ryan, any luck?
That was a no.
Maybe that you should go back to the other audio system, which was not great, but we could at least hear you. So I want to just add to the comments that people have made about both the character of these buildings and the way in which they reflect the people who live there. And I want to add that although the 2 front buildings have been resided and windows have been moved, so they, unlike the rear building, don't fully express their original character. Nonetheless, the massing is all there, the shape is all there, and so you can get a pretty good idea of what these buildings were like when they were built, despite the siding that has been put over them. Ryan, are you ready to try again?
Can you hear me now?
We can,
Yeah,
yes.
better.
God, sorry. You know what? I wish I had something meaningful to share, but I don't. I agree with what everyone had stated. That's all I have to contribute.
Okay.
How was that?
Okay, but now we can hear you
It's all
saying.
right, but now we have
Thanks,
you for the
Ryan.
future.
Thank you, folks. Sorry about that.
Okay. So this is before us on a demolition permit. We've determined these buildings to be historic, and the decision tonight is whether they're preferably preserved. Are we ready to act on that? Okay. So we start with voice vote, and then we'll do a roll call vote. So all in favor of determining these buildings preferably preserved, say aye.
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 And now a roll call vote. So Robin,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Eric, did you answer?
I did. Yeah, sorry. Didn't.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear, but that could be at my end. And Ryan,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. Now, Sarah?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, could I ask that you, even though it's one property, there are 3 buildings, could you take a vote on each building separately? 21 Allen, 23 Allen, and then the building that's identified as the rear building, and then do a roll call and findings for each?
Sure.
Thank you.
So let's start with 21. So Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric?
Yeah.
And Ryan?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Let's now do 23. Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And now the rear building. Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So we've now unanimously voted yes on all 3 buildings. We now need to make findings for them. I'm going to suggest that we start with building 21 and make findings for that. And then we can either adopt those findings for other buildings or change them for the other buildings as we go along. So Sarah, are there proposed findings for 21 in the report?
So, so the findings that you need to make, yes. So for each one, there is, if you look at the findings section, it spells out what the findings are that you need to make. If the demolition of the structure would be detrimental to the heritage, culture, et cetera, of the city. And so you would take that vote for each one and also indicate why you are taking that particular vote. Like, what is it about the reasons that you've given that make your vote what it is?
Thanks. Does somebody want to begin proposing findings for 21?
The property retains its original form and massing and contributes to the overall streetscape, and which is culturally and historically significant for its association with working class immigrants to the city.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Anybody want to add to that?
Sort of add to me to that it's not that occupant of Union Square too, of that what Robin said. Just I would augment that a bit by saying it reflects that working class history of the early 1850s, give or take, of Union Square, which is
Thanks, Eric. Anybody else? So those were the things that I had on my list. So let's take a roll call vote about on adopting these as our findings for 21, and then we'll go on to the other buildings on the property. So all in favor of adopting these as our findings for 21? Ellen? Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric? Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, and I also vote yes. Okay, now 23. Are there differences from this list that we would want to adopt for 23?
I see the front buildings being very similar in terms of significance.
I agree. So if there are no other changes, let's take a roll call vote on adopting these as our findings for 23. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric? Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Now the rear building. Any changes or additions for the rear building?
So I don't think we can indicate that it necessarily contributes to the streetscape, but the overall form and massing of the building appears to be original, and it retains a tremendous amount of its original detailing, as Adam noted, including some of its windows and corbels and other good details.
It also, I think it's worth, I don't mean to interrupt, Robin, but I think you're,
Yeah.
that it seems to date from a period about 50 years later, according to the records that Sarah was able to find. So it's capturing a different period in Union Square's cultural history. The demographics and the use of the space had shifted to the point where they needed to put this, large second building at the rear of the property too. I think it definitely, it adds to the overall property's testament of the history.
Thanks, DJ. Any other additions or changes? Okay, let's take a roll call vote on adopting these as our findings on the rear building. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So we've now determined these three buildings to be preferably preserved, and this begins the period for the owner to work with us to see whether there are ways to preserve these buildings. Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. So for the applicants, Julian, Max, and Caleb, if you want to reach out to me, the earliest I have open on my appointment calendar right now is the last week in March. But if you want to write to me sort of the middle to end of next week to start setting up a time so that I can go over what the next steps are, what we do, how the process works, then I can get something on my calendar. We can start to meet.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure thing.
Thanks. The next case on our agenda is, sorry, was there something else?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. 129 Boston Ave is here.
Okay, good, thank you. So we had held 129 for the applicants to be here. I'm glad that you're here. So let's do that case next, and that's HPC DMO 2020.27. That's 129 Boston Avenue.
Okay, if you could, Charlotte, unmute Eamon Fee.
He is unmuted.
So Eamon, you'll just have to make sure that you unmute yourself on your end. And if you and Kevin are there together, if you each separately identify yourself by name each time that you start speaking, because we don't get to see you, it'll only be recorded, so we'll need to know who's speaking.
Okay, guys, so can you hear me? This is Eamon Fee. And I'm unmuted, so my partner Kevin's here.
Okay, Director, my name is Kevin Emery. You guys hearing us okay?
Yep.
We were present before, but it was under a different name. I was trying to call you guys, but I was muted, so I couldn't.
Got you. I think one of you, I'm not sure if you're on one's on your phone and one's on the computer, but we're getting some loud feedback every time. There's sort of like a ringing. You might have to mute yourselves on one or the other.
Okay, let's switch this off.
That's
Okay, is that better?
That seems to be better. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Want me to go?
Yes, please.
Is this Kevin Emery?
For the record, again, my name is Kevin Emery. We're the owners of property 129 Boston Ave. We met with you last month. We're here for the second phase, which is the perfectly preserved. I read the staff report and it said they didn't uncover any additional information regarding the 75-year period. Talk about the demo. In my opinion, the demo of this building will not be detrimental to the architectural, cultural, political, etc. of Somerville. I grew up in Somerville. I lived there for 40 years. My father lived there for 60 plus. In fact, he was a police officer there for 35 years. I probably drove down every street in the city over that time. I know the houses that stick out that are historical. I know the ones that are on the registry. This particular house pretty much is vinyl side, vinyl windows. There's more vinyl than you care to have in a house. And it's in a large neighborhood with all different types of homes in it. In my opinion, does not have any historical significance to the city of Somerville. And that goes to my living there all these years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, Eamon here. I'll reiterate what Kevin says. It's a single family house. It's one of two, I guess. There is other samples of that property in Somerville, so it's not a very pretty house. It's kind of ugly, and again, it's wrapped in plastic, and hopefully we can do something there that's a lot nicer and would sustain us over the years. That's all I have to say.
Can you tell us anything about what you're planning to put there?
Well, yeah, we took a good walk around the area, and we took a snapshot of a lot of different properties, and we kind of culminated into it. We're going to put 2 units there, and it's going to have features that's across this. You know, we took samples of what's across the street, more of a gambrel situation.
Well, it's more of like a historic, some of like the old Philadelphia colonials type of style. What you have, the bay effect in the front, and then it's 2.5 stories with dormers. And what we did was, like I said, I grew up probably about 5 streets from there, so it's right off near Highland Road. And we took a lot of the houses on that street. We pretty much designed something pretty similar to what's there now that would fit into the neighborhood, and in my opinion, better than what that house that's there now.
Thank you. Anything else we should know before we ask for public comment?
No, I think that's it.
I think we did present a copy of the plans. I don't know if you guys have seen them, but like I said, I've done this. I mean, I haven't been in front of the board in a while, but I've built in Somerville for 30 years, and I've dealt with the historical and planning over the years a lot. I've probably built over 200 units, and pretty much designed something that I thought the board would want us to design, put it that way. Not only the, you see a lot of the modern houses going up now. Nothing to do with that. It's more of a, would fit into Somerville. Thank you.
Thanks. This is a public hearing, so I now want to invite members of the public who want to comment on this proposal. Are there any members of the public who'd like to comment on this proposal?
This is Charlotte speaking. As a reminder to the public, if you wish to comment, you should raise your hand and that will let staff know to unmute you. But at this time, I do not see anyone raising their hands. Oh, there is one. Shane McMahon. Shane, you are unmuted.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Shane McMahon. I spoke at the last hearing, and I think I'm still kind of stand by that. But I think just so everyone's aware, I live in the house next door, which is a twin, and I think just as much as it can be preserved, that would be ideal. Especially just as as from the front, it is a direct mirror of the two houses. And that's really it. Thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you. Any other members of the public?
This is Charlotte speaking. I do not see anyone else with their hand raised.
Thank you. We now ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Yeah, the challenge with this house from a historic research perspective was that there's a very slim time frame for its period of historic significance based on roughly when we think that it was built. It could have been built anytime between roughly 1921 and 1940 to 1945. And so 1945 is actually our cutoff date at this point for significance. We can't go beyond that. And it's a rolling date because we do 75 years now. So other than the information that I was able to come across for the report on historic significance, I was not able to find anything else at this time for this meeting. So.
Thank you. We open this now for discussion by commissioners. Anybody have thoughts about this?
Hi, it's Robin. So understanding that it is vinyl clad and has vinyl windows, the house retains its original form and massing, appears to, have the original fenestration and things like that, placement of fenestration. And as a twin, it's even more important because the pair makes a greater impact on the streetscape. And we don't have that many two-story gambrels in the city. We have many, many of the larger variety, the sort of 2 3/4 story gambrels, but not as many of the 2-story. And so I think it's important to preserve this property and maintain its integrity with the twin.
Thank you. Just add to that most of the gambrels in the city face with their short side toward the street, and these are unusual in having their long side facing toward the street.
Yeah.
Thanks. Other people have comments?
I would concur, I think, with what you both have said. It's relatively new for what we see, and that actually makes it a little bit more scarce in a house like this. As far as integrity, as Robin said, it's pretty much the massing's there. It's just siding, which easy come, easy go kind of thing that could be removed. So it's a fairly intact house. Its position on the street as part of grouping of two is pretty truly, but it's very uncommon to have that. So I think the street it's not all that same kind of house, but I think that whole cluster of things is important there. That its neighbor would suddenly lose its position.
Thanks, Eric. Other thoughts?
Yeah, echoing what Robin and Eric have said, but nothing original to add.
Okay, in that case, are we ready to take a vote on whether it is preferably preserved? Okay, so we'll do that first by voice vote and then by roll call vote. Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric, Ryan,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. We now need to adopt findings. Anybody want to start proposing findings?
I would mention the two things. Which one is that style is relatively scarce. That's a good representation of that particular time period. Style with a face, not common. And also just its position relative to the adjacent house in terms of scale. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in terms of the criteria for findings, I mean, I think we're mostly, I think, looking at architectural significance more so than any other. At least that's how I understand what people are talking about.
Rather than cultural.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any particular, that I've seen, we don't have any particular records on the cultural and political. I mean, economic, sure, it says something that in the 1920s to 1940s, this was a style getting built, but overall, I think it's architectural significance more than anything else, would be my impression.
Thanks, DJ. Any other commissioners? So I want to add a few things. People have noted that it's a two-story gambrel, and since it faces the street with, it really is in the form of a Dutch colonial, which was a fashionable style in the 1920s, and we have very few of those in Somerville. And I would add to comments that several people have made about the adjacent houses where it fits in the streetscape with other houses from that period, but with which it belonged. And of course, obviously, specifically the house to its right, which is the twin. And did we include, well, we just made the list now, the integrity that Robin had mentioned in her original comments?
Of the massing.
Add the integrity, not only the massing, but also the fenestration. So other than the fact that it's been vinyl sided, everything that we can see back seems pretty original on it. Do we know, by the way, whether the front door is original? It's certainly appropriate.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you're asking me, but I don't know, no.
No, I was asking whether any of us knew. Anything else by way of findings? If not, are we ready to vote on adopting the findings? Sarah, do we need to take a voice vote and then a roll call, or can we just go right to the roll call?
I think it's best if you do a voice vote and then a roll call. Typically
Okay.
The way we do it.
So we'll do this first as a voice vote and then as a roll call vote. All in favor of adopting these as our findings? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and now roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yeah.
Brian,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. Sarah, is there anything that we need to tell the applicants now?
I'll just, thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. So Eamon and Keith, I'll just say what I said to the last set of applicants, which is if you want to email me at the end, towards the end of next week, to start setting up some times for when we can, start talking about what the next steps are and how that process looks. That'd be great. I'm not open until for meetings right now. My schedule is jam-packed until the really last week in March. So it might be the beginning of April, but if you get in touch with me, then I will get back to you in a few days after that and we'll set something up.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's now go on to the next case, which is HPC DMO 2021.03, 27 Allen Street. Are the applicants here?
Yes, that would be.
Caleb Manchester is unmuted. Julian Lewis is unmuted. And if there's anyone else from the applicant team who needs to be unmuted, please just raise your hand. Caleb, whenever you wish to start.
Okay, so if you're ready, please go ahead and tell us about your project.
Hi there, Caleb Manchester again. This time talking about 27 Allen Street, the existing structure, one structure on the property. It's a two-family building built in 1890. The plan is to demolish the building.
So is your plan for one structure that's going to cover both this property and the other property we looked at before?
Again, our plans aren't that well developed yet. We're working through a number of schemes. Yes.
Thank you. Anything else we should know about this?
Not from my end. Thank you.
I'm now going to open this for public comment. Are there members of the public who'd like to comment on this proposal?
This is Charlotte speaking. I do not see anyone raising their hand, but we can give it a moment if people need time to react. I see Bill Cavallini with his hand raised. Bill, you are unmuted.
Thanks. It's not Bill, it's Kate Byrne. And I just want to say that, and I know this doesn't matter, but I'm the president of the board of the Community Action Agency, which is right next to this property. And so, we're just concerned about, this seems to be a really lovely building, and I'm not sure why it would be torn down. And we're just concerned about what's going to happen in the neighborhood. That's all.
Thank you. Other members of the public?
This is Charlotte speaking. I do not see anyone else raising their hand.
Thank you. Then let me ask Sarah for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. So if you take a look at the staff report, that property, if you take a look at the historic significance report, and also I reiterate it in the one for tonight, is that property remained either vacant for 100, I shouldn't say 100 years, but from at least the mid portion of the 19th century onward, save for having some outbuildings, either barns or stables, and we know that because of the symbols that are used for the structures that are on there at some point in time. And then after that, those stables were removed. At what point the current building was actually constructed, we're not sure, but it's definitely after it seems to be after or around 1895 or a little bit later.
Thank you. We open this now for discussion by commissioners. Thoughts about this property?
Hi, it's Robin. And much like 21 and 23, this structure seems to maintain its original form and massing and contributes to the overall streetscape of these smaller scale wood frame worker houses.
Thanks, Robin. Anybody else?
I would agree, and it's interesting. Oh, hello. The fact that it seems to be 40, maybe 50 years later than the adjacent house, in some contexts would make it less relevant. But I think the fact that it was built in such a way that it relates to its surroundings and probably by the same sorts of people keeps it kind of, to me, as a member of that category. Like it's still, it is better that it remained there in that shape. It has been there 100 years plus. It's likely got the same demographic living in it, and it's kind of relevant within a streetscape. So I would pretty much apply the same rationale to keeping this one preserved. Adjacent property.
Thank you. Other commissioners?
I think I would add to Eric's that according to what staff found, it seems like it wasn't even just the same demographic living in it. It was the same family at one point. It was from 21 to 27. Which
Yeah,
makes
that's
me
correct.
wonder what 25 was.
I wonder too. It's unclear if 25 was that building. It's unclear if at one point 23 was also 25, but then became 23 and a half, or 23 and a half was, some other structure on the property that had been an outbuilding and you're something else. It's hard to know.
Definitely muddy.
Could have been an outbuilding too. Our house originally had a barn and it had its own street address.
Entirely possible.
Other commissioners?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. So are we ready to take action on this? This again is a demolition permit, and the question before us is whether this building is preferably preserved. And after we vote, we will then vote to adopt findings. So we're first going to take a voice vote and then do a roll call vote. So all in favor of determining this building preferably preserved? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Now roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. We now need to adopt findings.
I think we could pretty much replicate the ones for the adjacent building.
Okay. So that would include the streetscape, the fact that it has its overall form and massing, the cultural and historical significance in terms of Somerville as an immigrant city, and its reflection on 1850s in Union Square.
In this case, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be a slightly later period. This building was 1890s.
Sarah, do we have an estimate for how old this building is?
So I think it's fair to say that it's 1900 or later.
The year 1900.
Roughly about 1900, yeah. So that's definitely a circa, yeah. Turn of the 20th century.
Okay. Good, thank you. Anything else about it? So let me just note, and this is just speaking personally, that I find it somewhat distressing that the applicants come having purchased all these properties, but say that they haven't really figured out what their plans are going to be. Our test here is whether these buildings are preferably preserved, and preferable is a relative term compared to what happens if they are not preserved. And so it would be easier to think about this if the applicants would actually come and tell us what their plans were so that we could think about whether preserving them is preferable. But they have not provided us with that information. Any other findings? Okay. Are we ready to vote then? Okay. So all in favor of adopting the findings that we listed? They're substantially the same as for 21 and 23 with the change of the period for the building. All in favor of adopting those as our findings, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And now roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So the applicants know from our previous discussions what the next steps are here.
Correct. Yeah, you guys. So when you get in touch with me at towards the middle to end of next week, just get in touch with me about all the properties here, and we'll set up some time. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, commissioners.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next property in the last of our determinations of preferably preserved is HPC DMO 2021 .05 377 Washington Street. Are the applicants here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Ann Vigorito is here.
Good
This
evening.
is Charlotte speaking.
members of the board.
Evening. Is there anybody else on the applicant team?
Mr. Luchulis is not joining us this evening.
Thank you.
I apologize. I know I had emailed Ms. White this afternoon because I was informed by Mr. Luchulis this morning that he has signed a purchase and sale agreement on the property. So we would respectfully request to continue this matter until June. Reason being, they're scheduled to close April 30th, but sometimes, there could be a little bit of lag time, and he would want a new owner to be a part of the preferably preserved, talks and discussions. And in fact, I'm encouraging him to have the purchaser to reach out to Ms. White to have some discussions so that, when they come before the board in June, that there would be, an actual plan of sorts, because I'm not sure at this time what the buyer, proposes to do with the site. And, we don't want any conjecture. I would rather have the new owner involved.
Thank you. Sarah, can we accept an oral request for continuance?
Yes, you can, Mr. Chairman, and just make the vote so that based on the applicant request and the board's agreement, that this will be continued to the June Historic Preservation Commission meeting, 2021.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So this is a vote on the applicant's request to continue until June. We'll do it first by voice vote and then by roll call vote. All in favor of continuing in this case until June, say aye.
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 And now roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. The case is continued till June.
Thank you. In a little bit.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our determinations of preferably preserved. The next group of cases are cases of determination of historic significance. That's the first step in the demolition review process. And the first case is HPC DMO 2021.06. That's 1 Washington Street. The applicant's here.
Let me see.
This is Charlotte speaking. I'm really sorry, I'm
Yes.
gonna butcher this. Pierre-Jean Wally is here and is unmuted.
Correct.
You guys, can you hear?
We can hear you.
Good evening, board. This is Naranjan. I've been a resident of the city of San Diego for the past few years now, so kind of like moving out of the city. I work as a software engineer for the tech company in South Boston.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to stop you. It's quite difficult to understand you. I don't know if you need to.
Fading in and out.
All right, could you hear me now?
That seems better. I want to make sure that we can hear you.
No worries. I will try to speak louder. So this is Niranjan, resident of the city of Somerville for the past 2 years. I work as an engineer for a tech company in South Boston. Have been residing at this property for the past few months. I'm looking to demolish this property for development.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask any of the commissioners, if you're not currently speaking, could you mute yourselves? Because some of that feedback might be coming from one of us too. Just unmute when you're ready to make a comment.
Thank you.
Except you, Mr. Chairman, you can't mute yourself.
I do that at meetings all day long. Anything else from the applicant?
No, that's it. This is the first time I'm in front of the board, so happy to listen and learn from you guys.
Great, thank you. I now want to see if there are any members of the public who want to comment on this proposal.
This is Charlotte speaking. I do see one. Oscar DeTuya, you are unmuted.
Oh, okay, thank you. Hi, this is Oscar. I just happen to live down the block. I don't really have an opinion one way or another, except that the property is pretty much covered in asphalt. So it would be nice to see something there that has just more vegetation. But my question really is, what is the plan after demolition? Like, what is it that the property owner wants to place there, please?
So if I could, Mr. Chairman, at least from a staff perspective, from a planning office perspective, we haven't seen any plans yet. And typically I don't at this point, but I would defer to the applicant to see if he has any notion of what he might be looking to do.
So, I currently do not have any concrete plans yet, but, after the demolition, it would be something kind of like, multifamily that the city of Somerville has determined for this particular lot. So we'd, actually work with the city for the zoning and.
Okay, thank you. I would encourage neighbors to speak to the applicant and the applicant to speak to the neighbors, and then maybe that the applicant will know more or be able to tell us more if we determine it significant in the case, then comes back next month for a public hearing or preferably preserved.
I'm more than open for speaking with anyone at this point.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak?
This is Charlotte speaking. I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Thanks. So let's now move on to staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. You'd think I'd have this right in front of me, but if I have one more thing on my screen, I won't even know where to look. So this is an interesting property. It's right on the border with Charlestown. right? And as we all remember, parts of Somerville, this part of Somerville used to be Charlestown, right? It used to extend through this whole area here, but right now it's on the border. If you take a look at the historic maps, and it has continually been the same form, the same massing, and largely the same shape with no additional outbuildings on the property. You know, as far back as we can see on the historic maps. This area was had a couple of vinegar factories, and if you've taken a look at the staff report, Somerville was quite the heart of the vinegar and pickle making back in the 19th century, and I think it's something we laugh about now, but pickles are wonderful and quite tasty, and they kept a long time, right, in an era without refrigeration and whatnot. And we were the center of there were a lot of railroads that came into the city, so they brought a lot of produce. We're right near Boston, et cetera. So we were a prime location for having a lot of these factories and commercial enterprises here in the city. And so it really took off, and Somerville became like the biggest vinegar and pickle making area in certainly all of New England. And the vinegar factory, if you take a look at the staff report, Standard Vinegar was the name it eventually took on, and that eventually grew into being Very Fine. If you know Very Fine apple juice and Very Fine fruit juices, that is from Somerville. That was another sub-brand to the Standard Company. So a little bit of Somerville on Washington Street has really kind of gone a long way across the country. So a little bit of business, a little bit of immigrant history, and the map research really in particular, if you take a look at it. And I know that the public is not actively looking at these staff reports now that you have in front of you, but they are available online. You really see how the city begins to grow. As you take a look at those changes on the map from 1874 to 1884 to 1895 and what we're able to get a hold of. So it's really quite interesting to see the changes in that particular area of the city.
And I can see by looking at the map that there's sort of this almost pie-shaped piece taken out of Somerville that gets down to where that house is
right.
When Charlestown and Somerville were separated.
Correct.
Do you have any idea, Sarah, about why it's that very odd shape?
Yeah, I don't know why that slice is the way it is, but one can only surmise, and one does that very carefully. But there are always politics at play, and when it comes to land and property ownership, there's money and jealousy and issues of possession and all sorts of things that go on. So I'm not really sure why that is the way it is, but it is really an odd little cutout, instead of having a more rectilinear city line.
Thanks. Anything else about the property itself that you think we should know?
I think what is, from a massing standpoint, it retains the same massing as it always has, right? It's always had that single story bump out on the side. It's always had the smaller addition. Well, when I say smaller, I mean the addition that's not part of the main massing in the rear. It has always been a gable fronted structure. The front porch is likely a newer addition. Certainly the way it appears now, that's very clear. Whether it was an open porch at some point in its history is unclear. Oftentimes these just tended to have a front stoop when they were built, especially working class housing, which this would have been. They would have just had, a stoop with a bit of a door hood and a cover on it. They wouldn't have necessarily had a very large open engaged porch at the time.
Thanks. So let me open this up now for discussion by commissioners.
I think I'd like to start actually, if I could, with a quick question to Sarah. Is there any indication that this particular property had any connection to the vinegar making, or is that just sort of neighborhood context?
That's just neighborhood context. I have no I have no indication one way or another that, say, the residents here would have been, say, like laborers in the vinegar making factory or workers in them, but certainly the vinegar factories in the area would have been a very large source of employment for the people who lived here.
I noticed that he was a cooper. I didn't know if there was any indication that he made barrels for pickles or
For the vinegar and pickles, I don't know. It's entirely possible. Yes.
Plausible, yeah.
Yes. So for those who are unaware, a cooper makes barrels, right? And that's how liquids and things such as pickles and whatnot were stored. If you died at sea, a lot of times you were pickled in the barrel and brought home that way. I mean, that is, I'm not joking, it actually served a lot of purposes. So yeah, barrel makers were very, very, very important for the shipping industry. Notice there was a lot of shipping that did occur, like maritime trades. We're close enough to Charlestown, close enough to the harbor that we would have had something like that here. If you recall the Allen Street properties that we just looked at, there was a rope walk there, which was a very, very long, narrow expanse of land, sometimes covered, sometimes open, where contiguous sections of hemp were woven together in order to make rope for ships. So we had a lot of, we don't think of ourselves as a maritime locale. It's not that we're right on the water, but we did serve a lot of the maritime trades, in part by virtue of the rails that came here, right? They also went into the shipping yards, and certainly by the rivers that once flowed above ground here as well. And they provided us access to places with larger open seas.
Thanks. Other questions or comments?
I'm a little bit on the fence on this one, simply on the grounds that it's, it's a pretty decent example of its massing and character, but it's not a character or style of architecture that's particularly lacking around Somerville that I can think of. I mean, I could see it going either way, and I defer to my colleagues in the commission who are more architectural history buffs than I am. I don't know. It's a reasonably well-preserved massing to me, and that's about it. The fenestration looks to have been changed, the siding looks to have been changed, the porch is added. On the other hand, it's sort of part of the overall character of the neighborhood, and I think it would, to me, depend what it was sort of getting replaced by to some extent, which is not really a question about significance. That's more of a preferably preserved topic, I think. Okay. So I'm talking myself into feeling like it's more in keeping with the architectural character of the neighborhood and the general trends of things in terms of significance. And preferably preserved would be a separate conversation to me then. Okay. Getting the steps straight in my head.
Thanks,
Talking it all through.
Other comments?
That's my thoughts.
I guess I would just add that aside from the brick foundation, most of the original material architectural elements are either covered up or not there. But I think the one thing that, had this been significantly altered, I kind of tipped the scale for me, but because we can tell that the form and the massing and the location are the same, I think for that reason it stays, for that reason alone, it can be considered historically significant.
Does anyone know how it fits into the other houses surrounding? Is it similar at all, or is it a pattern of style, or is it unique? I'm just curious if anyone's been up there and seen this.
So there's a gable front structure kind of next door to it, to its right, kind of set back. But otherwise, a lot of the smaller houses that remain are two-story mansards.
Okay.
And then there's a whole hodgepodge of, concrete. There's the appliance place. It's like a concrete block building, and something that has funny storefront stuck on the front of it and things like that. But it does have a, sort of front-facing gable structure next to it. But there's been so much alteration in a lot of those buildings right around Washington Street that I'm not seeing its, notable, any significance that it has. I don't know that it's lending to the streetscape particularly. I think it's the integrity of maintaining its original form, massing, and location. And that's sort of, in my mind, the beginning and end of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert.
If you look at the aerial view, you can see that it really, although it's nominally on Washington Street, it really belongs to Crescent Street. And Washington and Crescent Street there, as the map show, define the city line. And so the sort of almost alternating of mansard cottages and then gable end Italianate houses like this one. So the first house on Crescent is a gabled house like this. There then are 2 mansards, but then there's another gabled house after that that seems fairly similar to this one. Then another mansard, and then another gabled end house. So this neighborhood, you think about it as Crescent Street wrapping around the corner, seems to be the mix of those.
Yeah, I was going to say it feels more in keeping with the houses that are up Crescent or up Mount Vernon. And if you look back at the older Sanborn maps and so forth, the property maps, the character of the houses along Washington was much more like this before. Obviously, 100 years of 100 some years of redevelopment and everything else there that turned it into the commercial industrial strip that it is today, mostly. So it's sort of like just barely retaining the character.
Yeah, I kind of concur with that. I was on the fence at this because it's quite the same reason. The value it has is that it's a building that seems to be plus or minus 150 years old, which is not significant. It doesn't hold any particular spot on the streetscape. It's not part of any sort of similarly designed houses, similarly aged maybe. But forms intact, some modifications. So, I'm on the fence about it. I probably lean a little bit towards significance and then consider whether it ought to be kept or not. That's my feeling.
Thanks, Eric.
Sure.
Other comments? I would just add that although it's clear that some of the fenestration has changed and a number of windows have been covered up, looks like most of the windows that remain probably reflect the original fenestration. The 2 windows on the second floor in the front and the one on the third floor certainly look like they are in the original locations, even if there was probably another window on the first floor, on the second floor that was covered up, and so forth for the house. So unlike, say, some of the houses on Allen Street where the fenestration seemed to be completely different, probably than it was originally, this one seems like it has a lot of the original fenestration, even if it doesn't have all of it. We ready to act on this? Okay, so this is an application for demolition permit, and we are at step 1 determining whether the property is historically significant. All in favor of determining the building to be significant, say aye, and then we'll take a roll call vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Now roll call. Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ryan,
No.
and I would vote yes. So that is 5 in favor and 1 against. We now need to adopt findings. Anybody want to start proposing findings?
I guess I would just say directly from the staff report, maintains integrity of location, form, and massing. And I think, like Robin said, I think it kind of stops and ends there. That's kind of my.
Yeah, architectural representation of the building at that time period, reasonably intact form.
Any other suggested findings? I would add that that much of the fenestration seems to be intact, and that if viewed as part of Crescent Street rather than Washington Street, really reflects the neighborhood and the city line. It seems like an important part of that streetscape, which is a mix of mansard cottages and gabled Italianettes like this one.
Mm-hmm. I'd be curious as well if there's any record of what the streetscape along Washington looked like in that time period. I don't know if there are historic photos that staff has access to or anything easily. I don't want to send Sarah on a wild goose chase.
Oh, that's okay. Sarah stops chasing the geese at some point.
Yes, exactly.
But no, I'll take a look and see what we have, if we have something in some of our files. I mean, I only have access to electronic files at this time. So, and that's really all we have anyhow, but I'll take a look and see if we have anything.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, are we ready to vote on adopting findings? Okay, so our list includes form, massing, reasonably intact fenestration and integrity, and then streetscape taken as Washington Street and continuing up Crescent. All in favor of adopting those as our findings, say aye.
Aye.
Now roll call vote. Robin,
Yes.
DJ,
Yes.
Adam,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ryan,
Say no.
and I would vote yes. So the vote again is 5 in favor and 1 against. There are the things that we need to tell the applicant now at this stage.
Sure. So the next stage is that at the April hearing of the HPC, which is on April 20th, this gets advertised again, right, to abutters. Legal ad is published in the paper as well. And at that point in April, they will determine whether or not the building is preferably preserved or not. And if they determine it's not preferably preserved, then it's released for demolition. If it is determined to be preferably preserved, then that starts a maximum 12-month time period where you would work with me as staff and then with the Historic Preservation Commission once we come to what we think could be an agreement for actually preserving the building, alternative means of preservation, which could include, photography, architectural drawings, salvage, that type of thing. So the next stage, though, is for them to determine whether or not we will engage in those types of discussions. And so that, again, will be on April 20th. There'll be another staff report that's produced, and I'll be sending you a copy of that ahead of time, just as I will with the commission.
All right,
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
Our next case is HPC DMO 2021.08, 187 Central Street. The applicant's here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe that Ann Vigorito is here as well for the applicant. And is there anybody else here as well, or is it just you?
It's just me this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Good evening, Ann Vigorito. I am the attorney for the applicant at 187 Central Street. I did review the staff report. It was very interesting. I always enjoy them, Sarah. Not a lot to say here. I mean, this is it's quite a lovely colonial revival. The applicant, obviously wants to do some development work on the site. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it back to the board maybe for the public comment, just because, we agree it's a lovely colonial revival. I don't know what else I can say.
Thank you. And I want to turn it over for public comment. And before I do that, let me note that we've also received a lot of written comment. And so we'll take public comment, and then Sarah, I will ask if you will fill in about the written comment that we've received. So are there people who are here to comment on this project?
Yes, this is Charlotte speaking. First up, we have Councillor Klingon. Councillor, if you want to go later, just let us know and we can push you off until later. But you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll let the public go first.
We'll come back to you later.
Thank you,
First
Klingon.
up, in that case, is Jessica Snare. Jessica, you are unmuted.
We just, if we could, Charlotte, before that, I know that Councillor Niedergang had sent comments and wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make it. Do we know if he is here?
He does not appear to be here, but if I see his name pop up, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica,
No, I'm sorry,
you
the
are
first member of the
unmuted.
public.
Jessica Snare, you are unmuted, but you'll need to unmute yourself as well. Once your microphone is green, that means we can hear you. Right now it's red. Okay, it seems like Jessica does not wish to speak. We have Representative Capuano. Representative Capuano, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank the members and the staff for doing this. It's been a long time since I spent this much time at a public meeting in Somerville. I haven't forgotten, but I guess I'm getting more comfortable in my couch than you have been. Particularly you, Dick. I cannot believe you're still doing this sick. God bless you. But anyway, I really just want to reiterate what I put into my written comments. If this would be a horrendous action to take in the city, if they could do it to this house, they could do it to any house in this city. And I believe everybody knows this house knows that. It could use a nice facelift, and honestly, I would like a developer to come in and do something nice with it. There's plenty of opportunity to do something good with this house. And as I pointed out to my letter, the house on Sycamore Street that we fought, it's got to be 40 years ago, and they came up with a decent proposal. There's houses all over the city that they've done a good job with like this. And this could be as well. I don't know if this is the same person we had a public hearing with, I don't know, a few years ago, if I remember correctly, that wanted to add significantly, and he didn't get the message. The whole neighborhood showed up, and they're opposed to this. Look, I've listened to the meeting all night. You guys have done a great job. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with some of these. I really appreciate the vote you've taken and the action taken. Preserving Somerville as it is, for those of us who love it, is critically important. There's plenty of opportunity and places for appropriate development. This is clearly, unequivocally, one of them. It is a historic property. It's a historic neighborhood, and particularly historic and important, I believe, I hope, to the Jewish community. This is the home of the man who opened up a hospital because, as a Jew, he was not allowed to practice at the Somerville Hospital in those days. That's a pretty strong statement, and I know that you know this neighborhood. There are several houses that are almost in a duplicate, but darn close to it, to this house. Together, they make this neighborhood. Anyway, I think you all know that. I'm not telling you you don't know. I really just wanted to thank you and wanted to be clear that, you know, my wife and I have voiced our opinion as strongly as we can. And I will tell you that we will be at every step of the process on this to make sure it doesn't happen. And just as information, particularly if you did, since you've been around so long, I was out of local politics for a few years back in the 80s, before some of you were born. And I got back into politics because directly across the street from this, at the beautiful big home, it used to be a yellow home, now it's a greenhouse, and the setback, I was giving the numbers now, I put them in the letter. There was a proposal by the person who lived next door to 187 at the time to knock them down and build 30, 40 units of condos. And the neighborhood came together to propose that. And by the way, that was the most powerful politician of the day at the time who wanted to do that. If we can say no to them and preserve this neighborhood, you can certainly say this is a historic property, and we can do everything we can to defeat this proposal. Again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and effort. I really appreciate the love and commitment that you put in, because I know you're not doing it for the big pay.
Thank you, Representative Capuano.
Uh,
Are there other members of the public who'd like to speak?
There are. This is Charlotte speaking. Jessica Snare has indicated that she wishes to speak. Jessica, you are unmuted.
Okay, I figured it out. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. I didn't know which microphone to press earlier. I am one of the people who did write in. And so I don't know if you're going to read the letters or if I should read my letter. I live on the same block as this, as well as Mr. Capuano, and obviously very strongly opposed to taking a beautiful, leafy, mature, lovely lot and building to tear it down for an unknown development. Should I read my letter, or are you going to read the letters anyway?
We are not necessarily going to read them. They are all going to be part of the record. But you are welcome
Maybe
to
I'll
read.
go ahead and read it, Mr. Chairman.
No,
no?
You are welcome to read yours.
Okay, it's going to have more detail than what I would say. I'm writing with concern for the demolition of the building at 187 Central Street, especially in light of the previous hearings by the same owner in October 2019, which enlightened us to a development request for 8 units on the property with non-conforming lot coverage or green space, non-conforming parking spot dimensions, as well as non-conforming setbacks, and a complete removal of existing lawn and plantings. No consideration was allowed for the discrete storage of 16 large garbage and recycling bins, which would result from 8 units, which in very tight formation takes up a 17-foot wide by 5-foot deep space. We are obviously disadvantaged not knowing what the developer intends for the property, and a review of the very new zoning ordinance processes leaves us with no ability to foresee how aggressive the new request will be for this lot. Therefore, we cannot comment at this point on appropriateness or how our neighborhood will be impacted, even though it would be fairer to all of us to discuss demolition with more project-specific knowledge, wouldn't it? This leaves us with the demolition process only and providing a determination. Although my husband and I
I'm sorry, Jessica, I'm afraid we've lost you. We can't hear you at all.
This is Charlotte speaking. Jessica is still unmuted.
You're kidding.
I'm not sure what the issue is.
You're not hearing any of this?
We can hear you right now, but right after you finished talking about roughly the 17-foot wide area about that and not knowing what the plans were, that after that we didn't hear anything.
We are obviously disadvantaged not knowing. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. We heard that part.
Okay, this leaves us with the demolition process only and providing a determination of significance. Although my husband and I, as 27-year residents of this same block, do not have enough time to research why this property might be significant historically by use or ownership, we can, as two architects, emotionally appeal to you that the building is elegantly and comfortably partnering with the rest of the buildings in this very lovely neighborhood in which there are multiple historic homes, of which ours is one. There is lovely mature planting as well, which is a significant contributor to this leafy street. The City of Somerville ordinance from September 24th, 2020 for demolition states that the following, starts with the following two quotes. Quote, the city seeks to maintain and enhance its historic character, and, quote, the demolition of significant preferably preserved buildings can have impacts on the city historic character. In hopeful anticipation of step 2, determination of preferably preserved, we strongly request that the building at 187 Central Street be determined historically significant in its architectural role and scale within our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who want to comment?
This is Charlotte speaking. At this time, the only other member of the public who is indicating that they wish to speak is Councillor Klingon. Councillor, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you, board, for this opportunity to speak. As the ward councillor who this property is located in my ward, I just want to speak strongly in favor of its historical significance. I did read the staff report, and I think it's, and also based on what Representative Congressman Capuano said, the fact that this gentleman was a Jewish individual who could not practice at the hospital. Well, first, I actually have a question for you, Sarah. The house at the corner has been deemed historical, the hospital building itself?
Meaning, like, is it a historic district?
Like,
essentially,
you know,
is it protected?
Yeah.
It is
has
not.
it been noted? Okay, so it hasn't come up. I mean, I think these two properties in conjunction with each other should be deemed significant, based on the fact that, you know, you have a hospital where many people, Somerville people were born in, and here you had a doctor and his nurse wife, and as well as nurses were trained at this location. I think, to me, that to me says that this is extremely historical significant. Never mind, of course, the design, the architecture of it, in keeping with the neighborhood, as many have said. I don't think it's appropriate to destroy such a fine building. And then lastly, I'll say on that building itself has, I know this isn't necessarily a historical piece, but in terms of Somerville history, many thousands upon thousands of children, disadvantaged and so on, went through that house, as it was a daycare program run by Catholic Charities, myself included. I painted many pictures there, finger paintings. I made ice cream in the backyard. But personal attachment aside, I just think with the noted history by Ms. Sarah White, with regards to this being the home of this prominent doctor who delivered many babies in that house on the corner. And I just think it would be a horrendous mistake to tear this building down. I think it's historically, I'll leave it up to you professionals, but I mean, personally, I think it's pretty significant. And just based on the beauty of it and its design, I can't imagine somebody tearing it down. And there isn't even a plan in place. It's such an insult to the community. They're not even asking, like, you know, what it is they're looking to do, but not that should matter. I think that they can work within the confines of this property and make something that could work for the community. So I ask you to, do your due diligence, and I look forward to hearing the discussion. I really hope that you'll err on the side of the community and myself and Dr. Dickerson and all the babies that were born in that hospital over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Klingon.
At this time,
Charlotte, is there
this is
anybody
Charlotte
else?
speaking. We actually do have one other member of the public who has indicated that they wish to speak. Anne Beckman, you are unmuted.
Hi, my name is Anne Beckman, and I live at 183 Central Street, right next to the property in question. And, you know, being abutters, we're understandably, you know, interested in what happens there. And I'm not going to, I would say I would agree with everyone, with Jessica, with Mike, with Jesse, everyone who's spoken. And we also wrote in my children, my husband, my mom, and myself who live here. But the only thing I would just add is that there are really good examples with regard to development of developing within the historical, within a significant property. Just to the other side of us at 181 is a really good example of 4 condos that were put in there, 3, 1 bedroom, 1, like 3 bedroom, 2 floor. So there certainly can be development within historical homes if that were to happen, and that's certainly not the only option. But again, I would just say we're watching expectantly, wondering what is going to happen, very committed to, you know, not wanting to see a property like that destroyed. If they could do that, should then we level our house and put up a development? You know, it's the character of the neighborhood, I guess. And I do respect an owner's opportunity to do something. So I do want to say that, but that's our concern, and we just agree with these questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the work that you're doing. It's been interesting listening in.
Good. Thank you.
This is
Any other
Charlotte
members of the
speaking.
public?
There are no other members of the public indicating that they wish to speak.
Thank you. Sarah, can I ask you to summarize the written comments that we got? But before we do that, I think I'm going to ask you to read out loud Councilor Niedergang's comments.
Sure. And before I do that, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd want to correct something that I stated when Councilor Klingon asked me a question. I misunderstood your question. This property is 400 Broadway is a local historic district. It is a single property local historic district, but that district does not extend down Central Street at all. So 400 Broadway is just its own singular structure that is designated as a local historic district. I apologize. I was up until 3 o'clock this morning.
That's okay.
So I'm a little out there right now. So I apologize for misunderstanding your question.
At the pleasure of the chair, can I be allowed just one quick comment?
Please.
So based on that fact, Sarah, I just think that's even more of an argument and reason why this house, which is attached historically to that old hospital building, I think, I'd love to see a nice plaque on this building describing the history, and maybe we should talk about extending that historic district down further. But thank you again for your indulgence. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Clinton.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, you asked if I would read Councilor Niedergang's letter into the record. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then I want to ask you, because we got so many comments, not to read all of them, but if you could briefly summarize at least the numbers of, and whether they were for and against this proposal.
Yes. That I can do actually right now while I pull up Councilor Niedergang's letter. We received 15, aside from Councilor Niedergang and Congressman Capuano's messages, we received 15 letters in total, and all of them were in opposition to the demolition for a variety of different reasons, many of which have been mentioned tonight. And so far, anyone who has spoken who mentioned that they did read a letter, they were received. I sent them out to the HPC for them to review. And then tonight, I acknowledged to each of you that they were sent. So hopefully you all either have seen those emails or will be seeing them in your inbox. So that's 15. I'm sorry, I can't quite do like walking and chewing gum here. There we go. Let's see. I apologize for this taking a minute here.
That's quite all right.
Okay. Apologies. So this is from Councillor Niedergang. I will read as quickly as possible, and I can do that pretty quickly. So hang on to your hats. So dear Chair Bingham and members of the Historical Preservation Commission, I'm writing to ask you to declare 187 Central Street historically significant and to apply the full maximum 12-month demolition delay period to it in the hope of negotiating an agreement with the owner to preserve this beautiful and historic property fully or at least partially. I have a City Council Land Use Committee meeting at the same time as your meeting, so I will be unable to testify in person. I represent the residents on the other side of Central Street as the Ward 5 City Councilor. Full disclosure, I'm also a longtime member, 30 years of Congregation B'nai B'rith, which is located next door to 187 Central Street at 201 Central Street. As such, I am extremely familiar with this property and neighborhood. Separately, I have forwarded to you information from Lisa Gregerman, Executive Director of Congregation B'nai B'rith, with some fascinating history of this property. The property is an architectural gem that is quite lovely aesthetically. This property with the current structure on it fits well into the neighborhood and surrounding structures and enhances the appearance of the neighborhood. It is a piece of this pretty unique area of Somerville. Furthermore, there is a lot of lovely green space and many trees on this property now, which has significant environmental benefits to the neighborhood and to the city. As you may be aware or may hear testimony about, there are flooding issues from properties on this part of Central Street to the abutting properties behind. Most likely, if this house is demolished, structures that cover much of the green space will be built and we will lose the green space on the property. I call your attention to the email from former Mayor and Congressman Mike Capuano and his wife Barbara, who live across the street. They make some excellent points about why it is important to preserve this building. Thank you, Mark Niedergang, Ward 5 City Councilor, 29 Conwell Street.
Thank you, Sarah. So with that, I now want to ask for a staff report.
Want me to talk more?
Sure.
I will make it very brief because the staff report is significant in length and there is a lot of information contained therein. So I would invite the public to go to the Historic Preservation Commission's reports and decision page where you can find the staff report on 187 Central Street, so you can read some of the history of it more at your leisure. The first person we know of who owned the house is someone named Sylvester Briggs. He was a man who initially came from Freetown, Massachusetts, from a long line of people who were in the tanning and hide business. So they were leather tanners. And they eventually also had a shoe company as well. He was in that business with his father for a while. It was known as S. Briggs and Son. And then eventually it was, it became, I think it was called like S. Briggs and Company or Briggs and Company. Anyhow, it was a hide and leather business for many, many years. In 1891, he left that business. He decided that he was going to continue pursuing his own investments. And he was also in banking. And so you will see across the census records and in some of the city directories that his job is as a broker, right? So he was an investment broker and a banker. He clearly had quite a bit of money. He had about the early part of the 20th century, his wife had passed away. His daughter was living with him and her 3 children. His daughter was married, but interestingly in the census, her husband does not appear there, so we're not quite sure where he was at the time. His unmarried sister also lived with him, and she had been a school teacher and eventually became employed in a religious organization. The family was Unitarian and they were very, very devoted to Unitarian causes. And I talk about him being a man of means because at the time in the, I believe it's the 1900 or 1910 census, not only is he the head of household and listed as the owner of the house as opposed to a renter, but one of the questions on the census at the time was whether or not you were a freeholder of the house or whether there was a mortgage on it. And at the time, he owned the house completely outright. So that's not certainly something that we see much today. And you know, back then was not necessarily any different. You always owed money to somebody. But at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, okay, this is taking longer than I expected. I'll try to make it zippier. If you were a person of means, one of the things that you would do, much like today, is you would travel. But travel back then was certainly something that you did by steamship, right? And to some degree rail. So his sister and his daughter made a trip to Jerusalem. And this was actually written up in a book about prominent people in Middlesex County at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they went to Jerusalem, they went to Madeira, they went to Rome, Naples, Constantinople. The cost of a trip like this was not insignificant, not just in time, because this would have taken many, many months to go to all these stops. And it's quoted in the staff report, but the amount of money it would take for the initial passage across the Atlantic and over to the Mediterranean, the overland passages, the in-between ships journeys that they would have to take, and then getting all the way back, the accommodations you'd pay for. They weren't traveling in steerage. I can pretty much assure you of that. Unlike my relatives who came over to this country, they came in steerage. These people were not traveling at that class. Were they traveling with the Vanderbilts? Probably not. But they certainly were doing quite well for themselves. So after Briggs died, we see that Herbert and Dora Baker bought the house in 1921. There's really not much that we see about the Bakers in the historic record. And they sold it in 1928 to the Dickermans. And it's Dr. Dickerman that we've heard many people, Councillor Klingon and Congressman Capuano and others speak about tonight. So he was he emigrated from Russia in 1892. And again, every time the federal census is done, there are different questions that are asked. Some are routine, some are standard, but others are different. And one of the questions on the census was about the language that you spoke, and your first language that you spoke, your native tongue. And for him, it was not Russian, it was Yiddish. So he was a Jewish man who had emigrated from Russia at the time, and he was a doctor. He had a 4-year college degree. You didn't necessarily go to 8 years of medical school at the time, either here or in other countries. And he started the Sunnyside Hospital. And Sunnyside Hospital started on Main Street in Somerville, and then it was moved to 400 Broadway, which is right at the corner of Central Street. So yes, that is a mansard house from the 1860s, 1870s, and Dr. Dickerman purchased it, and it became a hospital. And so what you see right after that, so in 1929 was the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. And so in the 1930 census, you see 14 people living at 187 Central Street. Yes, it's a big house. It's over 4,000 square feet, but still 14 people living in that house at the same time. You know, it's not an insignificant number of people. And all of the people, save for the children of the Dickermans and a couple of people who were servants. One was a domestic, a servant at the, I believe at the hospital, and one was a laundress at the hospital. And I'm sorry, one was a cook. Everyone else was a nurse in training. So they were more than likely, it said at a private hospital, but they were more than likely training right at Sunnyside Hospital. And so they were lodging with their employer, and as lodgers, they weren't living there for free, they paid a little bit. So during the Great Depression, people doubled up, tripled up, you know, multipled up as a way of getting by. You were grateful to have a job, and you did what you could working together, you know, to help get through these really, really, really tough economic times. The next census that we see is 1940. And in that census, at that time, there are 16 people living in that house. So now we're talking about the very end of the Great Depression. Right before, a couple years before we really fully got into World War II. So you're seeing a lot of constraints here. You're seeing economic constraints. You're seeing people who do have jobs, but you know, you still need to pile together to make things work. You couldn't necessarily afford to live on your own, and maybe you wouldn't. It was just as younger people have roommates now. When you get out of college or whatever, people did that then too, but a lot of times that happened when you were older as well. There was a laborer who was living there at the time, and you had some people who were probably not working at the hospital, but who were also lodgers in the building. So Dr. Dickerman seemed to be, you know, engaged to some degree in Jewish philanthropies. There was for the time in 1944, in today's equivalent of just over a $4,000 donation to the combined, I think it's called the Combined Jewish Fund. And which was a fundraising arm of, now it's an organization that's out of Canada. So there was philanthropy, there was obviously a dedication to the medical profession, and as Congressman Capuano said, you know, as a Jewish man, he was not allowed to practice in a lot of other places. So here he is, you know, really significantly contributing to this community in so many ways. He's an immigrant, he's a Jewish man, ends up the synagogue is built eventually right next to his property. During the time that he is actually living there, they sold the property, I believe, roughly around 1960. So they have a really lengthy spate of time at this property, and really had quite a mark on the community. As you can see in the staff report too, there were some recollections from people back in 2005, and later on some comments from 2011 about the recollections of Sunnyside Hospital and Dr. Dickerman himself. So, you know, here was somebody who really was, who really made quite a contribution to our community. That was not short, and I'm sorry. And no, I wasn't reading that was from memory. So maybe that's why I seem to prattle on for a little bit. But there you have it.
Wasn't short. In addition, I'm going to ask for a little bit more, because in addition to the historical and cultural background, I wanted to ask if you wanted to just speak briefly about the architecture.
Sure. So this is very much a colonial revival style house. So the colonial revival period was, you say roughly 1880 to roughly 1950, right? It had a very long span of popularity, and the earlier stages of the colonial revival period, I kind of think 1880 is a little bit early, but you know, we do see it in some parts of the country. The earlier stages of the colonial revival period, you see a lot more detail provided on the facades of these buildings, to some degree like what you see on 187 Central. You see dental, you see the dental moldings underneath the cornice. And for those who are unfamiliar with the term, it's dental, D-E-N-T-I-L, saying it for the public's purpose. And basically it looks like little teeth. It's just spelled with an I-L. And that's the form that you see. That's the design that you see right under the roof line on this building if you look closely. You also see it underneath the roof line of the covered portico at the front. It has all the standard and classical hallmarks of a colonial revival building. You see the bow, you see the two-story bows in the front. You see the polygonal bows on the side. You see the center entrance, which is classic. You see the fan light over the door. You see lights, L-I-T-E-S, on the side of the door, literally the glass. And you see that it, in combination with 183, which is immediately abutting to the right, and then 181, which is just a little bit further down the street from that, they form a cluster, a street wall of relatively grand colonial revival houses in Somerville. And they were built within roughly, say, like a 5 to 7 year period of each other. So it makes a statement. The building does, and it makes a statement not just individually. Sure, it needs a little brushing and polishing, but not just individually does it make a statement, but it makes a statement as part of a colonial revival streetscape on that part of Central Street. If you look further down the street, I believe I forget if it's 183 or 181 Central, you see other colonial revival motifs, such as the swags that you see between the first story and the second story on the trim band there on the string course. Another element that you see is the columns, right? They're Doric columns supporting the porticos on a couple of these houses. The columns can be a little bit more Greek revival, but that was accepted too. So you have like a amalgamation of really key features of past architectural movements, architectural periods, colonial, federal, Greek revival in particular, all kind of come together in the colonial revival style, which you see here at 187 Central Street.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. So I now want to open this for discussion by commissioners.
Hi, it's Robin. So I don't recall when we've last had a property that had so much historical merit to it, both architecturally and culturally. It seems like the clearest no-brainer to me that this is very much a historically significant property. And I agree with the conversation earlier that it would be, that we should look at making this a local historic district in conjunction, Sunnyside Hospital, the former building, or the building of the former hospital at 400 Broadway.
Thanks, Robin. Other members of the commission?
I don't have a whole lot to add because Sarah and Robin really kind of covered it in great detail. It's got integrity. It has, history, ownership. So it's a pity that it just want to go on and take it out. So to me, it's significant.
Thanks, Eric. Others?
I would agree. Comments too. I think it's amazing what that property has contributed to the city and that neighborhood in particular. Just the stories of like amazing property has contributed to the city. If there's anything that was historic and significant and meaningful, that's the definition of it, in my opinion.
Thanks, Ryan. Others?
I was going to add that, I think everything everyone has said, I wholeheartedly agree with. I did do a little tiny bit of research because seeing the name Dickerman in Somerville history made me immediately wonder if there was any connection to the school committee member Quincy Dickerman. It doesn't appear that there was. I think just it's a commonality of last name. But one of those things that it's worth sort of having in the record in case anyone in the future is searching for information about either of them, figuring out that they're not connected. It's helpful.
If I could add to that.
Looking. Yeah.
If I could add to that too, Mr. Chairman, the other thing too is that, which is not uncommon, right? When people emigrated from other countries, is some of them chose a name when they came here. Others had a name chosen for them by virtue of misspelling. I know, and some changed their name afterwards. So it could be just, a common name for some reason. So we might not necessarily know what his name, if this was his name or, what it was in Russian or whatnot. Like my own husband's family, and they're Jewish immigrants from Lithuania and Russia. And their name was Rudashevsky, spelled a variety of different names, but it became Rudolph eventually. So there are a lot of different reasons that, people have changed their names. So we might not ever know, but I was really quite curious about that myself when I saw his first language and where he came from, but yet with the last name Dickerman. So I'm not Henry Louis Gates Jr. and it's not finding your roots, but it is something that I would kind of like to know myself.
Just because people have Dick in their name doesn't mean necessarily that they're all related. Other comments?
Well, I obviously agree with everything that's been said. This is more of a curiosity thing, and I apologize if I missed it in the report, but I'm just wondering if the porch always was enclosed on the top or if it was at one point open.
I don't think that it was. I think that is one of the things that I mentioned in the report, is that to me seems like a later alteration, because you don't see that at all. That looks like a Somerville enclosure, like we needed more room, right? We wanted more inside space. Just like the way people would enclose a sleeping porch at the back of their house. But if you typically look, it would have like it would have rails maybe at the top of that open portico. But yeah,
I did find it interesting though, because part of looking into that, they did replicate the same dental detail, and they did it in the right way so that it has the same. It's actually the same exact dentals, which kind of confused me, but makes me believe that it was maybe added a while ago.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that is I suppose it's, well, I suppose it's possible that it could have been a 2-story open. It could have been open on the upper level too. I mean, it is a little bit unusual to have that same dental at that level. So could that have been an open porch, almost like a 2-story open Greek Revival porch? So that's a possibility as well.
That, just for the record, that's just strictly a curiosity thing. I think regardless of when that was added, it does not detract anything from the merit of the building. It was more of a kind of architectural history of when that was added to the building.
If you look at that house next door at 183, which has an almost identical porch,
right?
And the second floor porch is an open porch with a railing around it. It seems likely that 187 had a very similar porch. So I would agree with all of the comments that all the commissioners have made about both the historic and architectural merit of this house. And I only want to note that in some ways it's sort of too easy to look at this, a no-brainer, as Robin said, and it is. But we look at a lot of other properties which are not as architecturally impressive, and we know less about the people, and they were less important people. But part of our job is preserving those aspects of Somerville, as well as we did when we were looking at Allen Street today, where the architecture was not of the same quality and also was not as fully preserved, and the people were not as important to the city as a whole, but they were still part of our community, and so preserving their history is important too. Sarah?
Mr. Chairman, could I just add one thing? And I'm really glad to hear you say that, because for the purpose of the audience, that is a hallmark of the historic preservation movement in the United States, right? Which is we honor everyone, right? It doesn't matter your social class. It doesn't matter your economic class. And it's not just about, a supposed important architect building your building, or a supposed important builder, or somebody important who lived there, important, quote unquote, right? It's about many more things. Right? What did this building become? It wasn't just a house. It ended up becoming something that, housed people serving the community, right? And there are all sorts of other ties that this has to the community that are beyond who built it, that are beyond who lived in it. But to your point, that is what's also important about all these workers' housing, all the workers' housing that we look to preserve where possible, because to not do that is almost in a way of saying that those people didn't matter. And that's the furthest thing from the truth, right? We are here to honor everybody. We're not like Europe and other countries that just look for the high style, right?
Thank you. Any last comments before we act on the application here? Okay, so this is before us on an application for a demolition permit, and the question is whether the property is significant. And let me note that the applicant graciously conceded, in fact, its significance at the beginning, and I thank her for that. And if we're ready to vote, we're going to do this first by a voice vote and then by a roll call vote. All in favor of determining this property to be significant, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And now roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. And now we need to find facts about why we think that it's significant. Somebody like to start the list?
The intact representation of a colonial revival house, early colonial revival association with people that mentioned in Sarah's report.
Thanks, Eric. I'll just add to that that it's part of a grouping of colonial revival houses together along Central Street.
All right.
Other facts that were important?
I think we need to note all of the Dr. Dickerman related history is
Historical Association.
very, yeah,
Yes.
very important.
Do we want to include Briggs as well?
I don't feel super compelled by Briggs, but I do think that in some ways it's interesting because obviously these beautiful big structures were built by well-to-do people at the time they were built. And as we could see, very quickly, things changed. And, within, how many years of the building's development were there 16, mostly unrelated people living there because economic circumstances had changed in the city and for its population. And so in that way, just as a counterpoint, I think the Briggs history is interesting. But it's really the Dickermans and their commitment to, that neighborhood and the people of
Thanks, Robin. Other comments? In that case, are we ready to vote on our findings? Okay, so first by voice vote and then by roll call. All in favor of adopting these as our findings, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And now roll call. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. There was a suggestion that we should consider including at least this house in an expanded historic preservation district. Do we want to have further discussion about that? Not to make any decision tonight. And there's a long process before things can be included in the historic district. But do we want to begin that process tonight?
Sarah, what does all of that involve? What would we need to do? Because this, the story of Sunnyside Hospital is wrapped up in 400 Broadway, but also very much 187 Central.
Right. So if we were to look at doing that, give me 1 second. I've got another work issue coming in right now. So what that would look like is, so there is a district already, right? It's a single property district, which is 400 Broadway. What we would look at doing is extending that district. We would extend the boundaries of that district to incorporate other properties along Central Street. Now, do you just want it to be 187 Central? Do you want it to be those other properties as well, which are Colonial Revival and Set That Streetscape, right? Are there properties on the other side that you want to include? I don't know. So those are the things that you have to look at. So there is the history already done on 400 Broadway. I'm sure that could always be expanded. It's always possible to do. We have the start of things for 187 Central, but we have to tie that in and tell the entire story of Central Street. Arguably from its inception, as we started to do with those with the early map research, and bring that forward. But I think that the most important thing that you need to determine first is what the boundaries of that district are that you want, right? That is always the guidance from the state. That is what I've done with every one of these districts that we look to create. What are those boundaries and what do they look like? And why? You can tell me your general reasons why, and then it becomes my job to go and do the research, do the investigation, pull the preliminary study report together, et cetera. I mean, this is a process.
It's
but yes, it can
remarkable
be
to
done.
me that Central Street, that particularly that run between Broadway and Medford is not already a historic district. But
There are, I think, some smaller, probably single property districts along it, particularly I think the Greek Revival House that is next door to Congressman Capuano, I think is a historic district, and I'm not sure whether any of the brick row houses on the corner are part of historic districts. So in a sense, we're talking sort of about expanding all of that.
Right. So if there are others that are single, other than 400 Broadway in that immediate area, then it makes sense to bring them into a more contiguous cluster, right? Rather than having outliers of just single building districts in a place where you want to combine buildings together, right? Because, I mean, you can certainly state that there are those 3 Colonial Revival houses also have a different contribution, right? But equally meaningful contribution to what that 187 is, right? And then clearly we understand 187 and its relationship to 400. So we just have to think about what that story is that it's telling. And it likely tells multiple stories at the same time, both architecturally as well as sociopolitically, economically, et cetera.
Perhaps, Sarah, we could ask if you could come to the next meeting with some preliminary thoughts to get us started. Would that be a good place to start?
Yeah, sure. We can put that on as one of the other business items, and we can just start having that initial discussion.
Okay. And let me just note for the record, since we are now discussing possibly expanded historic districts, and particularly including the house at 187 Central, connecting it with the 400 Broadway, where the Sunnyside Hospital was, and in between is the synagogue, and I want to note for the record that I'm a member of the synagogue.
As am I. I think our membership is correct. I actually need to double check that. We're at least a past member. We'll go with that.
Thanks. Other thoughts or comments on this before we move on to the rest of our agenda?
You're done with all your votes, yes?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
All right, so we voted on our findings, and so I think that we are good to go on this.
Is the applicant's representative still here? Yes. So just in keeping, and you know what happens for the next one, right? Goes to preferably preserve, additional staff report for that.
Yes, I understand.
Et cetera, at the April 20th. Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. So that was the end of all of the cases that require formal votes for this evening. So we're now going to move on to the rest of our agenda. And the first item on other business is a discussion of 125 Highland Avenue. 125 Highland Avenue was also applied for demolition permit. Normally, the first step would have been a determination of historical significance, except that, as Sarah noted earlier, because it's on the National Register of Historic Places, it is deemed to be significant, and we don't have to take a separate vote on that. But we are going to have a discussion with the applicant tonight. Is the applicant here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the applicant is Tony Barros, and Tony is here. So Tony, you're unmuted on our end, and I think you've just unmuted yourself on your end.
Yes, correct. Thank you guys for allowing me to speak, given the circumstances. As I know I sent in a letter about my thoughts and feelings with demoing the project. I'm not sure if everyone's read the letter. But in short, I mean, I'm here in front of you because I acknowledge the building was built a very long time ago. There is some significance, but I also have my feelings around why I think the building should be demolished. Kind of early on in the game, when I was initially looking at the project, I remember guys on the lodge would joke and say, "Hey, it'd be interesting if you did this project, considering the history of the architect that built the building." I can honestly say, I joked and I said, well, that's even more reason why I would want to do the project. Over a little bit of time, doing further research, after acquiring the building, it was very clear that they were not joking about those comments. And in fact, the more and more I dug in, it was pretty clear that Adam Crane had a really terrible past. And I would ask you guys to bear with me because this isn't an easy topic to talk about for me. I am an African American man, and I'm in a world of a developing where being an African American man isn't really common. So there are some challenges that come with that. And in this situation, I'm in a position where I have to develop something where the person that built the building and the architect, and Adam Crane, had a terrible past, documented all over the place. Had a horrible history of supremacist racism. He was even part of the Puritan Club in Boston, and one of the bylaws in that says members of the Puritan Club or guests are not allowed to give gratuity or tips to servants. I mean, I don't know back then if servants were no other than African Americans, and that's neither here or there. But obviously there's a history here that if I'm going to be asked to preserve something, I would love to to get into the fact and preserve something, educate folks on how far Somerville and the country has come. I mean, and there's a history that and I'm pretty sure when this, I wasn't aware that Northside was acknowledged as a historical building, but I'm pretty sure when it was before the times where a lot of folks open up their eyes on the history of the past, and a lot of things have changed. Black Lives Matter in particular, and Somerville was one of those first towns that had Black Lives Matter on City Hall, and I can tell you that made me really, really happy, and I can tell you, I love doing work in Somerville, knowing that it's a progressive city, and I get support, and I don't feel different. So I'm happy that you guys are here listening to me, and hopefully we can move forward and have these robust conversations about how can we actually address the heritage that Somerville does have. For me and everybody I know, the heritage is a pretty good one, and this architect's background and what he believed in doesn't speak to the language and how I see Somerville and many others. And that's kind of where I am with things. And I know we're going to progress on to having more conversations around that. But I'm pretty sure he never thought a Black African American kid would be making any change to developing the site. And thanks again for allowing me to speak today.
Thanks for coming to speak to us. Is there more that you would like us to know about this project?
No, I mean, I've done other projects in the city. I have a few other things permanent. I'm actually doing 124 Highland Ave right across the street. We did do some archives and some work with the Historic Commission on the memorandum to do some things with that site, which we successfully was able to do. And we were looking to come in and put an apartment building that was something, figuring out what we can do with it. It was very important to note that the project was a viable project with what's there. There is value in the space, but so it's not something that I'm trying to move forward with or trying to fatten my pocket. It's just the reality is a reality, and I think we're in a place now where what was okay back then isn't okay now. And I don't want to do something to reward someone's history. I rather reward changes that's been made.
Thanks, Stu. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant or any comments?
And I'm happy to start. I mean, I think that the applicant really, I very much see the perspective that you're coming from as much as I can, where I'm coming from, you know, recognizing where I sit. I feel conflicted about this because I very much see your point. And on the flip side, our mandate by the statute is to look at, you know, questions like whether it's importantly associated with a well-known and reputed architect, which, you know, despite his unsavory personal views in history, he undoubtedly was, which puts us in a tough spot. And I guess it comes to the question of, you know, if it ends up in a preferably preserved state, what does preferably preserved mean? It certainly doesn't mean that we can't also find a way to tell that story. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the building itself has to stay. So I think, as you know from the conversation across the street, right, that preservation can mean many things, and it actually becomes an opportunity to tell that story and to get some light shed on aspects of his past that aren't necessarily out there too. Which I guess my take is I'd look for a way to make an opportunity to find a way to tell the full story. That's my, you know, small 2 cents. Is just started thinking about it the last couple days.
Thanks, DJ. Other comments?
I'll just add that I'm in agreement that it's important to find out these things in history and try to tell a story about how we may have changed or feel differently. And, you know, it's a very different situation, but, you know, we recently worked pretty hard to change, you know, the name of our preschool was Agassiz, which was a long-standing, you know, Cambridge name and neighborhood, and you know, people have learned that a lot of the things that Agassiz did, you know, really wasn't a great person. So, you know, we're changing the name of the school and proudly doing so. So this is kind of one of those situations, and I think it's, you know, I don't even know where to start with the complexity of separating the building and what we're charged to do, but I appreciate what you're saying and I appreciate what you're trying to do. And I think, you know, as DJ said, it's important somehow to try to tell the story that you're trying to tell, and hopefully we can help you do that.
Yeah, I agree that it provides a really good opportunity for education and telling that story. And, you know, this is an aspect that I don't know that anyone on a historic commission necessarily thought they'd be thinking about. It had not occurred to me naively, but it feels to me, you know, very much like trying to separate a creation of art, whether it's music or film or a book or something like that, from, you know, that may be a wonderful example of that type of art from the creator, who may have been really unsavory or despicable. And so, but I think this is a really interesting opportunity with what is, you know, architecturally, aesthetically, an important structure in the city. But yeah, it's a lot for us to think through, and it will be interesting and important.
I think in some ways too, as there's nuance to everything, it's sort of one question is the designer of this building somebody who had bad views, or is this building a celebration of that person's views, or was it built around a purpose that was itself unsavory? So we kind of have to look at the full package. You know, who were the people that built it, or it kind of looks at both ways. It's most recently, it's been a church this whole time, right? For just various congregations. No. Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Sorry, no, so it was built for the Unitarians. I believe it was the first Unitarians. I think there were two organizations. Anyhow, so they had a church elsewhere.
If I may, I think it was actually built as the Universalist Church, and the Unitarian Church was the one that's across the street, the stone building. It's now.
You're right. I apologize. You're right. Now that they've merged, and I tend to do that. Yes.
Now they're the same organization, and they don't need two churches. It turns out they don't even need one on Highland Avenue.
Correct. Exactly. So thank you for correcting me on that. And I always do that, and that's my error and failing. But yes, it was created for the Universalists. There had been another church that they had, and they built this between, I think it started about 1916. I think that they were ensconced there by around 1918. They removed themselves from the building, I think around 1952, if I recall correctly. And then the Masons purchased the building at some point. And I think, and Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Masons still own it, but do they rent it out to the Apostolic Church? I always say that incorrectly too. Do they rent it out to them, or are they no longer holding services there?
I'm under the impression that they're no longer holding services, but I know they rent it out to other folks as well. It's kind of like a mixture at this point.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So the Universalists owned it for roughly like a little less than 50 years, and the Masons took it over at some point.
And it's original by design. It was meant to be a church for the Universalists then.
That is correct. That is correct.
Designed by this guy. By Cram, done a lot of work around Boston, of course.
Yeah, so he's done a lot of work around the country, done a lot of work on churches. And Tony, you and I have, I think, read the same things by now. If I recall correctly, he was raised either as a Universalist or Unitarian, and one or the other two of those in New Hampshire. And then he sort of experienced a conversion when he went to Rome at one point in his life. And he was kind of Episcopalian, kind of Catholic. So.
Okay.
I want to just add to the comments of my colleagues about how sometimes these things are complex and nuanced. I think of Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a longtime senator from Massachusetts, who was a very strong proponent of the idea of Anglo-Saxon superiority and was one of the leaders and strong proponents of immigration reform because he did not want to have America diluted, as he saw it, by immigrant blood. At the same time, he was also the lead sponsor of the last important Civil Rights Act to try and protect voting rights of African Americans in the South after the Civil War. So where do we categorize him? And I, like my colleagues, I think our job is not to categorize him, but to think about how we tell that whole story, warts and all. Other thoughts and comments? Tony, other comments and thoughts from you?
No, I kind of just, I feel like there is a lot of room for conversations. I know this is a unique situation. And, I think the timing and where we are as a country and everything is as important for what's going on. You know, this, you know, I'm pretty sure that a lot of folks who, you know, didn't think, no one thinks this far back when you start thinking of buildings and history and the importance of certain things. And, you know, I think when it comes up, it is important to address. And, you know, no matter how you break it up, you know, this guy really believed in something that just wasn't okay. You know, for me, there's either good or bad, race or no race. And he believed in a lot of bad things when it comes down to it. So, again, like I said, I'm open to having these robust conversations and making this an educational thing more than anything else. You know, it kind of, you know, to be honest, it was a little hurtful to hear that nationally it was recognized. But again, when it was recognized, our country was in a different place, and I also understand that. And I'm also open to having these tougher conversations, knowing that it is tough because there is history there. It is one of the oldest churches in Somerville, but you know, at the end of it, I don't think that's where Somerville stands, to me, and pretty sure a lot of people that I speak to in the community. So again, I thank you guys for, you know, even making this a session to allow me to speak on here today. You know, I have the full support of a lot of, you know, community folks. You know, projects have gone well and done what we were supposed to do. And I know the Masonic Lodge guys are, you know, ready to go to bat for me, because they, even in selling this, felt somewhat crazy that, you know, I would have to deal with this. And, you know, even after the fact, you know, it was communicated to me that a lot of churches that was shopped this deal walked away because they foresee some of this coming. You know, so again, thanks again for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to the next steps.
Thank you. We have on our agenda minutes for 2 meetings. Did those get circulated, Sarah?
No, they didn't. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I did get the minutes, but I didn't have a chance to circulate.
Okay.
So we can, you don't have to vote to continue them. They'll just be on for the next.
On for next time.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Adam. I didn't get them in time to say. I mean, I got them, but I couldn't hop on it quick enough.
I'll get them more than a full day before next time, so you have time.
Thanks.
I was up late that night too.
No, I hear you. I know.
Next item on the agenda is HPC officer roles. The commission elects at its annual meeting in May a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. We have, over the course of this past year, lost both our vice chair and our clerk through resignation. And then tonight, Alan, as the chair, was not able to make it for personal reasons. So it would be good if we had more officers than just Alan.
Alan and Adam.
Okay.
Who's our clerk?
Okay. I think I must not have been at the meeting when Adam actually got elected clerk. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I did not realize that, and I apologize.
Thank you.
So I knew people have been volunteering to act as clerk, and I didn't realize that you would actually been drafted to act as clerk on a permanent basis, or at least until the next election. But we do have a
drafted as, sorry.
We do have a vacancy for vice chair, and it would be good if we could get that filled. Among other things, then, if Alan is not able to make it, then we'll have a better answer than drafting me to sit in as chair. So I'd like to open nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to suggest nominating Eric if he's interested in that, having worked with Eric for, I think we've been on the commission together for 12 or so years now. Eric brings a wealth of knowledge and commitment to the role, so I think he'd be wonderful.
Okay, so Eric has been nominated. Eric, will you accept the nomination?
Yeah, I would accept that.
Okay, great. Well,
You didn't
thank
have
you.
to-
Are there other nominations? Other nominations? Hearing none, nominations are closed. So we'll now cast a vote for vice chair. We'll do this by, I guess, by voice vote and then by roll call, because that's what we do. So all in favor of electing Eric as vice chair, say aye.
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 Okay, roll call vote. Robin?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
No, I'm just kidding. Do I have to abstain from it or something, or?
It's up to you. You can vote for yourself. You can also abstain.
Fairly narcissistic. I'd say I'll abstain.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I'll abstain just because it seems narcissistic.
Okay, Eric is abstaining. Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, yes, and I'll vote yes. So 5-0 with one abstention. Eric, you are elected vice chair. Thank you for being willing to serve.
You're-
Is there anything else about officer roles that we need to deal with?
Nope, that's it. Get ready to lead a meeting next time, Mr. Parks.
Okay, is it, like a,
I'd like your description, Sarah, about roles. There was a joke that Supreme Court Justice Frankfurter and Supreme Court Justice Berger had important philosophical differences. They could never agree on the proper judicial role.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I like it. My husband does this. I've been living with this for 30 years.
The last thing on the agenda is, DJ knew that where that was coming from. I could see him shaking his head before I
think
got
I
out of my
heard
mouth.
that before from
Last
Did they have a hard
item on
time?
the agenda.
When they were hearing cases, did they have a hard time getting to the meat of the matter? Bum. Okay.
You got it.
I'm a little slow on the uptake, but I get there eventually.
You get there. Thank you, Sarah. The last thing on the agenda is CPC update, which normally Alan would give. Sarah, do you have anything that you want to say about that? And if not, we'll just hold that for the next meeting.
Let's see, at the last meeting, I believe it was their last meeting. I don't know. I don't believe they've had one in between, but not entirely sure. But there was a meeting when an update was given for, what each commission has been up to. So the Conservation Commission gave a presentation. Alan gave a presentation. I gave a presentation from a staff perspective. Just generally what I do, which nobody, other than you folks, nobody really knows what staff does for the HPC. So I figured I'd enlighten the CPC on that in 10 minutes or less, and I was less for once. But yeah, that was about it. And Alan has talked about, some of the things that you've started to do as a commission, right? You've become a little bit more consultative. When people come in for advisory reviews and that type of thing, the change in the demolition delay ordinance, et cetera. I talked from about what preservation planning does, and what, I personally like to see when it comes to CPC projects, which are blended projects, right? I like to see preservation and open space and affordable housing, or, if you're going to do preservation, I'd really like to see some affordable housing, right? Like the Mystic Waterworks or preservation and open space. But I think I'd really like to see many more blended projects where we're not just siloing projects. We're really having, we're really putting different buckets of CPA funds to good use in the same project. So that's about it.
Good, thanks. So we've now worked our way through the agenda. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
DJ moves.
First meeting you come that I've seen you at in a long time. And you're first one to raise your hand to adjourn. What the heck?
That's why we need him to come to meetings. Otherwise, we would never be able to conclude. Is there a second?
Yes. It's the second that is the fastest second in the West. Go ahead.
I second that.
Okay, second from Ryan. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
We don't need a roll call for that, do we, Sarah?
You should.
We should, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm a stickler.
Okay, Robin?
I say yes.
Okay, DJ?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Dick. Nice to see you all. DJ, very glad things went well.
Hopefully this is the beginning of a streak of making it much more often.
It's lovely to see you and the rest of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
See you
Thanks,
later.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.